Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Wallsend history story. I have been quite busy this week, so I've not had as much time to write, so this week's video is a little different to normal as it's mostly showing some old postcards of Wallsend and a little information about each photo and a more recent photo of the same area. However, with some of the photos it's impossible to get the exact same view today, so they will be as near as I can get them, apart from one which I can't really get an up-to-date photo of without climbing up a bank on the opposite side of the gut, which I've absolutely got no plans to do. Anyway, I hope you will enjoy it and find it interesting, even if just for looking at the old photos. The photo you can see on screen at the moment shows a view looking up Church Bank, which was taken from a spot on Rosehill Bank that I can no longer get access to. It shows the houses at the top of Church Bank quite clearly. Part of these were known as Bank Terrace, and also some of them were simply known as Church Bank. Below those houses on the same side of the road you can see a little farm in the burn, and this was known as Carling's Farm. Sadly, I know very little about Carling's Farm, so if anyone listening knows anything about it, do please let me know in the comments below. Looking to the left-hand side of the postcard you can see St Peter's Church in the distance, and you can also see Church Bank Cemetery and the cemetery house along with one of the chapels. And I can only assume it's the perspective of the photo that means you can only see one of the chapels, as the photo on screen now is the original picture that the previous card will have been taken from, and you can only see one of the chapels on that as well. Below the cemetery is a small row of houses. These were known as Turner's Buildings. Of course, the area where they were today is just grass and trees, and those little houses are long gone. The tiny small building, which I hope you can see on this cropped part of the postcard, was known as Granny Watson's shop. I have to admit to not knowing much about Granny Watson, so I did a quick search and found out that in 1934 the cottage in the photo was condemned. It was believed at the time to be over 300 years old and had been in the Watson family for around 100 years. Granny Watson was born there herself and was a well-known toffee maker in the area. She had died around 1911, or it may have been slightly later as the article was faded and hard to read the dates on it, at the age of 78, and since then her son James had taken over the business, and Granny Watson's real name, I believe, was Esther. This next postcard shows a very similar view, however it was clearly taken many years after the previous two. It's certainly after 1913, as you can see the Rose Inn in the bottom left hand corner. If you look carefully you can also see the grammar school, later the Burnside School in the distance at the top of the bank. Though of course at the time the photo was taken it would have been known as the Wallsend Secondary School, as that is the name it was built under in 1913. And it's probably worth adding that it was actually called the Wallsend Secondary School and Technical Institute, and in 1913 applications for the position of headmaster had received 117 replies. The salary at the time was £300 per year, which in today's money would be just over £43,000. The applications had been reduced to 8, and some of these had come in from as far afield as Leeds, Stoke-on-Trent and Lancaster, although it could be Lancashire as some of the articles say Lancaster, some say Lancashire. In the end, the first headmaster of the school was Mr. MacBretney, and he was 34 years old and came from Lancaster or Lancashire. The next couple of photos you can see are more up-to-date pictures. As you can see, the area has changed a lot. I can't really get to the location where I can get the exact same view as any of the previous photos, but you can see how Church Bank looks today from this first picture. More trees now than in the past, so these do obscure the view of Church Bank, Cemetery and the chapels. Moving on to this second picture, you can see a view of where Turner's Buildings used to be, which, as said earlier, is now just a patch of ground covered with trees, and so far, and I have looked, I haven't seen any signs of any of the old foundations of the previous buildings. And this last photo shows a view slightly higher up Church Bank, showing the new houses that were recently built in the exact same spot where the old ones used to be. But I do hope that these 3 older photos and the 3 newer ones give you a pretty good idea of the then and now of Church Bank. The next 2 photos are very, very similar. They both show a view looking down Church Bank, taken from roughly where Granny Watson's shop used to be. They both show the trams that went up and down the bank, and I am sure it would have been a lot quicker going down than it was coming up. On the first photo, I think you can just about make out how full the tram is by the amount of people on the top deck. And the second photo of the 2 clearly shows the allotments on Rosehill Bank in the distance. Both of the cards are pre-1913, as there is no sign of the new Rose Inn at the bottom of the bank. But you would have to look really hard to be able to see where the old Rose Inn is on either cards. And on this one, you can just see the houses on the right hand side of the card peeping through the trees just past the cemetery wall. This next photo shows you the same view today. The trees have grown, although at the moment they are not in full bloom, as it's a little too early at the minute, but it does mean that you don't get the same view looking down the bank today as you did in the past. And the bank doesn't look as steep in the new photo as it did in the old postcards, but trust me, it is. And if you're walking up it, you need a rest and oxygen at the top. The next photo I have included, even though I have no chance at all of getting an up-to-date picture, as I cannot really get a clear view from anywhere on the top of the bank now, which is, like I say, it's impossible with some of them. But I think it is a nice picture looking up Rosehill Bank, and thought it was worth including. The buildings you can see near the roadside in the centre of the photo, a little to the left hand side, are the buildings where the old Rose Inn used to stand. You can see that the curve of the road is slightly more than it is today, and this is where the road was slightly altered in the early 1900s. And you can also see people walking up and down the bank, along with a couple of horse and carts travelling the road as well. This next photo is a view looking down Rosehill Bank. Again, it does demonstrate just how much the bend in the road has straightened out. Sadly, you can't clearly see the old Rose Inn, but the first buildings in the centre of the photo on the right hand side of the road are where it was, and some of the chimney pots in the photo do belong to the pub itself. What you can see though is the 2 chapels in Church Bank Cemetery, which you couldn't see on either of the earlier photos in this video of Church Bank. And the photo on screen now shows the same view today looking down Rosehill Bank. There's almost nothing to see other than the road and the trees on either side, but you can sort of see how the road curves less, as I have mentioned once or twice before. Further down the road is where the wall breaks, and this is roughly where the old Rose Inn would have stood. This next photo is Wallsend High Street, taken from just before the Coach and Horses pub, which you can see on the left hand side of the photo. Some of the area on the right hand side of the photo is still just empty plots of lands with a few buildings in between. In the distance, if you look hard enough, you can see the spire of the Brunswick Methodist Church that used to stand at the bottom of Laburnum Avenue. The tram lines can be clearly seen, and I wonder if there was a tram stop on the right hand side of the photo, which might explain why there's so many people standing about, but of course they could also be waiting for the pub to open. This up-to-date photo shows the same location now, very different to how it was in the older photo. No sign of the spire, as the Brunswick was demolished back in 1975, and sadly the Coach and Horses is still standing empty, although it is now up for sale rather than for rent. But the details are seemingly only available to anyone who wishes to buy it, so I have not been able to check them out to see if they still have restrictions on the building, which previously said it could no longer be used as a public house. And the vacant land on the right hand side of the old photo is now used as a car wash, and a very popular car wash it is too. This next photo shows Wallsend Town Hall. I have covered the history of this in another video, so I won't go into detail about it again here, but this is a nice old postcard from a time when the town hall still had its railings. It's also interesting to see so many people standing outside, and it makes me wonder if they were standing there because they had seen the photographer, and a lot of them do look like they are children. I would say this photo was probably taken not long after the town hall was built. And this is the up-to-date version of the town hall postcard. The main differences are that it no longer has railings, though they probably vanished during the war, and the other changes are the addition of the signs for the people who own the building now. The building itself has changed very little since the earlier postcard photo, though of course years of being part of an industrial town has made it a little dirtier looking than it would have been when it was first built in 1908. And the next photo is a great old photo of the junction of Station Road and the High Street. On the left hand side of the postcard you can see what used to be Wallsend Cafe, which of course has had many uses since then, and some of the more memorable shops there have been Grafton's and later Greenways. At the time this was taken, I think it was still Books Fashions. On the right hand side you can just see the entrance to Martin's Bank. It is quite an impressive building, but then banks often were. A little past that on the same side you can see the Station Hotel or the Penny Wet, and there was a gap between the buildings just after that. Then you had the stretch of road where you would have found Ainsworth's, Carroll's and the original Hadrian shop. The traffic lights are quite basic, and I have cropped this part of the card in the hope that you can see the word stop written in the top light. And there's no crossing next to the lights, but clearly people still use that spot as a place to cross over to the opposite side, just as we still do today. And this last photo shows the same view today. It's very different as the Forum is set further back away from the corner of Station Road, and the shops don't begin until further along the road, so there seems to be much more open space than in the old postcard photo. And I've taken the up-to-date photo from a spot where you can just see the Anson, which is a little further along than the original. The original postcard, that is obviously not the original Anson, that's the only one that's ever been there. The old Wallsend Cafe is now a pound bargain shop, which has only just opened recently, and most of the buildings on this corner are exactly the same as they were in the postcard. The only ones missing are the ones where the Forum was built. And for anyone interested, I have covered the story of the Wallsend Cafe in another video. So I do promise that next week's video will be much more of a history story than this one has been, though there has been a little bit of history in this one. But I do hope that you have still enjoyed this little look at some of the old postcards that I have in my collection, and seeing some of the up-to-date views that go with them. And I hope you have found it interesting as well. I do thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again very soon.